What's going on, folks? Welcome to the MMA Sucka Podcast. My name is Tim Wheaton, joined as always by my God, I'm just so excited to get into this one. Frazer Krohn, how are you doing today, sir?
Yeah, we usually have a little sort of 10 or 15 minute chat before we start recording about, the weekend just gone, but we didn't want to waste any time because this could be a 10-hour podcast. Honestly. And we could only cover 2 fights on the card, but I'm so excited for this one. It's going to be an explosive episode. Maybe this is potentially one of the most excited I've been about an episode in a long time. Aside from, of course, Leon Edwards' head kick. We can't talk about that every episode. We used to talk about Tom Aspinall every episode. Now that he's on the treatment table, we talk about Leon Edwards' head kick every episode. But no, let's put that on the back burner for today. This card, UFC 282, was explosive, and we're get set for an explosive podcast because I'm ready for this one. I'm excited.
Let's get into it. I don't care what judging criteria you use. You can judge fights as a whole. You can look at damage. You can look at control. You can do round by round. I don't think under any judging system that you could pick Patrick Pimblett to have won that fight over Jared Gordon. Frazer, stop me when I'm wrong here.
It's the Dana White judging criteria, unfortunately. As long as you're friends with Dana White, as long as you have Dana White on your podcast during fight week, you're going to get your hand raised. I cannot. From the beginning of the week, we'll go on. Well, we'll obviously, we'll go straight. We'll go from the beginning of the week to discuss Paddy Pimblett's sort of essentially an interview with Dana White. He had him on his podcast. Paddy had Dana on his podcast, and he's a guy that preaches a lot about anti-bullying, supporting mental health, and all this, and yet he's on there openly mocking, just disgusting, vulgar language about Ariel Helwani, who, regardless of, we've all seen the hour-long footage now of Ariel pulling up the stats and essentially proving Paddy wrong, and it's not a good look for Paddy Pimblett. And yet he doubled down on that later on in the week in another interview. I can't remember who that interview's with, but he doubled down on the fact that Ariel did ask me for payment, or he asked me to cancel a paid interview. From our perspective, we tried to set up an interview with the fighter. I won't name the fighter once.
Yeah.
And said fighter asked for payment. We don't do that. All the people that you've interviewed, some of the biggest names in the sport, the few fighters that I've interviewed, the few fighters that I've had interviews scheduled with that never went ahead. You can never be angry at a fighter for not going ahead with an interview because we're not paying these guys wages. I set up the interview with Dakota Ditchever and Jeremy. I interviewed Dakota myself. Not one time did the sort of in-between between me and Dakota ask for any kind of payment. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, the media is there to promote these people. With no media, the pay-per-view buys would plummet, in my opinion. And that's not saying, me and you doing this podcast once a week is helping the UFC stay afloat. That's not the case. But in the case of Ariel Helwani, he is a massive name in the sport, in the media. 13 MMA Journalist of the Year awards in a row. He legitimately, in my opinion, helps drive pay-per-view buys with having the Paddy Pimbletts of this world on his podcast. And, we need to appreciate people like Ariel Helwani, and the fighters should appreciate people like Ariel Helwani because he does the sit-down interviews with the Conor McGregors, the Nate Diaz's, the John Joneses. He had, Ruffian Stotts and Danny Sabatello literally going back and forth on his podcast, and he was the mediator between these two.
Yeah.
He had Kayla Harrison after the loss. He had Kayla Harrison before the loss. He is the gold standard for me of MMA journalism. And no, he doesn't get the breaking news stories like he used to get. And that's purely, in my opinion, because of his relationship or lack thereof with Dana White. Brett Okamoto is now the sort of gold standard. If Brett says it goes. Yep. And he's the first to hear about, the majority of fight announcements, of news, of pullouts, of, title fights, whatnot.
Yeah.
But to go on a podcast and openly slag him off, I think Paddy lost a lot of fans, to be honest, especially when Ariel came out and proved him wrong, for want of a better,
Well, this is the weird thing. So Luke Thomas brought up a really good point with Ariel. Ariel has been in media fights before. One of them was with Luke Thomas. He's fighting with Rampage Jackson back in the day. He fought with Dana White. When Dana White wants certain journalists gone, like Josh Gross and Loretta Hunt, essentially they disappeared. Ariel is still here. It's been 15 years that the UFC has not liked him, and somehow he is in a higher position than he was. Paddy Pimblett getting in a fight with him, you are legitimately outgunned in this case. Like, it's not just the respect that we have for Ariel and the work that he does, of course, hugely respect the man. It's that Ariel kind of doesn't mess around. Like, anyone who's fought with him like that, he wins all of his media fights. I don't like, and I know it's stupid that he is involved in as much drama as he is. I don't think it's his fault. He doesn't go stirring stuff up, but if you stir up stuff with Ariel, he'll finish it.
Without a doubt. And, you know, I think that was just the first thing during fight week that had fans questioning their love and loyalty for Paddy Pimblett, because, like I say, you can't preach mental health and in one interview, in one post-fight interview, and then go and mock and bully and gang up on a journalist in another interview. It really struck me as and you know, older British fans might remember Jonathan Ross and Russell Brand mocking Andrew Sachs's daughter all those years ago, and that was just two friends that were bouncing off each other, and you know, they took the joke too far. And this is exactly how I feel that Paddy Pimblett and Dana White were. They were like two sort of school bullies, you know, goading each other, and you know, Dana just using insulting words without backing up any. By all means, you know, if you know, say if Ariel had really the 199 stuff with the return of Brock Lesnar at UFC 200, I think Dana had rights to be pissed off about that, because that was supposed to be the UFC breaking it, the promo, and then Brock Lesnar at the end. Ariel broke it a few hours early. Dana White, with that, kind of has reason to be pissed off at Ariel, but I just don't agree with what they did on that podcast, and then to double down on it in the week.
Well, and the irony of him saying, like, the labor that Ariel Helwani gets from fighters should be getting paid by. You're telling Dana White that? Do you have any sense of irony of what is going on here?
Well, that's the thing as well. And, you know, I saw a shorter video about someone sort of assessing Paddy Pimblett as a person. You know, he gets on the mic, he says, "Oh, fuck the Tories, blah, 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 blah."
Yeah, absolutely.
He's a working class guy from Liverpool. And then he sat discussing fighter pay with someone who, I'll be honest, does not care about fighter pay. Dana White does not care about. If Dana White cared about fighter pay, you wouldn't have people, you know, Diego Lima quite literally on his knees begging for 50K.
Yeah.
You know, you wouldn't have people constantly in post-fight interviews begging for 50K, which, you know, 50K is a lot of money to me. It's probably a lot of money to you. It's a lot of money to all these fighters. You know, no one doesn't want 50K, but to be quite literally begging for, you know, please give me the 50K. And then
it's embarrassing.
You know,
it's embarrassing for $1 billion corporation of, like, your employees are begging for 50K. Like, remember when Tom Aspinall main evented and then he cried after getting 50K? This is your main event guy crying over 50K.
This is the UFC back to London.
Yeah,
and you know, he's getting emotional because he didn't expect that. That is a big bonus to someone like Tom, and you know, like, you know, it's not just Tom. It would be a big bonus to Paddy. It would be a big bonus to, you know, the lowest guy or girl down on the card, and it would be a big bonus to the guys in the main event.
Yeah,
but it's ironic that Paddy preaches mental health. He preaches, you know, fuck the Tories, and he's a working class guy from Liverpool, and yet in the same interview, he spoke about fighter pay. He says you get what you deserve. Well, it's not always the case, unfortunately. You don't get what you deserve in the UFC. You're sat across the table from a legitimate billionaire who, you know, like I say, doesn't care about fighter pay. And then you go and preach about mental health in one interview, and in the next interview. Now, I'm not denying that he does care and does, you know, maybe he personally, well, he obviously is personally affected by mental health with I think it was his friend that took his life. Yeah. Before his fight in London. I'm not denying that Paddy Pimblett does care about people's mental health, and especially, you know, obviously the mental health of his friends. But for him to then flip that on its head, and whether he's so blind to the fact that would have potentially affected Ariel's mental health. I think he's smarter than that, and I know that Dana White's smarter than that. Dana White is just for want of a better word, a thug with a lot of money who controls the UFC, controls who gets in and who gets out of the UFC.
Yeah.
MMA Sucka has never been credentialed at a UFC event since I've worked with
at this rate, it's never going to happen either.
And this is why, because we speak the truth, we speak the truth, and all these, MMA fighting and MMA junkie, no disrespect to these guys, but they have to
toe the line.
Be careful with what they say, because they want to be credentialed, and of course, it's beneficial for them to be credentialed because they get the clicks, they get the interviews and whatnot. And, it would be beneficial for us to get credentialed. We'll keep trying, but we'll keep telling the truth as well. Dana White, in my opinion, is essentially a thug who constantly goes back on his word. As we'll see in the post-fight press conference, I don't make fights the night of the fight. I don't make new fights the night of the fights.
He was on the phone before this.
He was there. According to Jamal Hill, he was on the phone while the guys were still in the octagon. We'll go into talk about that later, but
maybe I don't even know if we have time to talk about the main event.
Exactly, that's the thing, and then for Paddy, that interview for me didn't go down well. He doubled down in the week, didn't go down. That was a bad look. And then the fight itself, ignoring the whole 15-minute fight itself, to then get on the mic and call for fight of the night, when he quite literally watched his countryman Darren Till put on the fight of the night. He's seen Ponzinibbio and Alex Morono put on a brilliant fight. He's seen Ilia Topuria and Bryce Mitchell put on a brilliant fight. Joaquin Buckley and Chris Curtis put on an exciting fight.
Yes, they did.
And then he's saying, give me fight of the night, give me fight of the night. Maybe that was just in the moment, but then after he'd calmed down and walked out the octagon, he was still calling for fight of the night off Dana. Rest assured, Paddy, you're getting paid a lot more than arguably your skill level should be allowed. It should not be allowed, but warrants, because you're friends with Dana White. And I tweeted, I did a bit of a Twitter thread last night and said it's a clear conflict of interest. For Paddy to go on Ariel's show, for example, there's no conflict of interest there, because Ariel and Paddy, that is a journalist and fighter relationship.
Mm-hmm.
For Paddy to then go and have Dana White on his podcast, he's not his manager, he's essentially his boss. Dana White is Paddy Pimblett's boss. Dana White, he doesn't come directly out of his pocket, but he owns the company that pays Paddy Pimblett.
Yeah.
It's in Dana White's best interest now, because he's now friends with Paddy Pimblett. There shouldn't, in my opinion, there should never be that Dana White and Paddy Pimblett friendship. There should be a colleague, a boss, worker kind of relationship. With Joe Rogan, it's different. When he has fighters on his podcast, he's a commentator. He has to be partial, and he shouldn't be partial, but Joe Rogan is contracted as a commentator for the UFC. He doesn't work specifically for the UFC. Don't pay his wage with regards to the podcast. The UFC actively pays Paddy Pimblett's wage. So I don't think that Dana White and Paddy Pimblett should be, friends like they are. Dana White, of course, you're going to have your favorites. We've got our favorite fighters. We've got our fighters that we, wouldn't mind seeing get knocked out. Let's just say that. But
of course,
but we can't say, for example, I want to see Paddy Pimblett get knocked out in his next fight, because that's the journalistic integrity. You don't actively favor the fighters. You're going to have your favored fighters. We have relationships with fighters that we interview on multiple occasions. That I know, obviously, you do a kickboxing show with a kickboxer, a former kickboxer. You're obviously going to favor him going into any fight that he has, because there's a friendship there. But he doesn't pay your wage, and likely and likewise you don't pay his wage. There can be a friendship there. I don't think Paddy should have had Dana on his podcast. And if he did, he then calls for fight of the night after one of the worst, if not the worst, fight on the card. Perhaps I didn't find that fight all that entertaining.
Well, I'll jump in on the Dana White tip. My working theory for years, for like almost a decade, is that Dana White is the president of the UFC, and he is just a symbol. I don't think he's actually, for almost 10 years now, I don't think he's been signing deals in the back room or anything like that. I don't think he's even been negotiating with fighters. I think he's basically just a promoter at this point. Because I remember specifically on like Dana White's pre YouTube fight week What do you say? Blog Week, Fight Week, or something like that. On those shows, you could actually see him negotiating with sponsors and negotiating with certain talents. Now he's not doing any of that, and you can see it in the way that he specific things that he'll say. The UFC will then do the opposite stuff. Just like I don't negotiate fights I don't negotiate fights on the night after a fight. Well, somebody else did. Or like women won't ever be allowed in the UFC. Well, it wasn't his decision to make, was it? Exactly. So there are very specific things where you can look at Dana White saying something and UFC doing something else. Dana White's a symbol. He basically isn't running the UFC at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And we're not expecting him to do every little thing, from going to watch every single regional show to see who, I don't expect him to watch every Cage Warriors show and say, oh, I want to sign him. He's obviously going to sort of outsource that. But with these guys, with making a title fight out of nowhere, Jamal Hill was scheduled to fight Anthony Smith. And then suddenly that needs some sort of backing, and for him to say, oh, it's looking like Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler might be Conor McGregor's return. And then he goes back on his word in the press conference this week.
It was Brett Okamoto who reported it. He's
exactly. And this is what we were talking, Brett Okamoto, the gold standard of UFC journalism at the moment. We're, like I said, we're not expecting Dana to sit down with every single fighter that UFC signs and go through every individual bit of their contract. This is why you've got managers. This is why you outsource. We're not expecting him to, work in the kitchens at the PI. We're not expecting him to maintain all the equipment at the PI. But as you said, I think he essentially gets a brief at the beginning of a week. Right, this is this week's fight card. These are the sort of highlight. You can't tell me that Dana White had watched any back footage on a lot of the fighters on the card on Saturday night, in my opinion. I would honestly argue if we had Dana White on the show, you could ask him 20 questions about, okay, who was Chris Curtis's last fight and where was it, and who did he step in for on late notice? He stepped in for Darren Till in London against Jack Manson and lost that fight. Then he flipped off Jack Manson. And, it's out of character. Then he returned against Joaquin Buckley. I don't think Dana White would have known that personally. And yes, he's got a lot more going on to know the backstory of Chris Curtis, to know the backstory of Darren Till, to know the backstory of Dricus du Plessis. But likewise, if you're going to be such a face of the company, you need to know this stuff. And, he's putting all this, January 2023 power slap press conference, all this. No one gives a shit about that power slap stuff. No. He tried Zuffa boxing. When's the last time you heard about Zuffa boxing?
It's dead. It's gone.
He has multiple different sort of food-based companies. No one really cares about that. Dana White, we want you to do what you do best, and that is promote fights.
Honestly,
Conor McGregor versus Floyd Mayweather was, they did a massive press tour. Dana White was so far up the arse of Conor McGregor that he stole the show.
He did.
The 155-pound champion of the UFC.
I don't know if I've ever had more fun than that fight week.
For sure. But that is what Dana White needs to do. He needs to be that over-the-top, brash American promoter. Scott Coker is completely different.
Yes.
Scott Coker promotes from behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Dana White loves to be the center of attention, hence why he comes out of the post-fight press conference on his own to speak and takes questions, because he likes to be that center of attention, which is not a bad thing. But when that transfers over to almost taking the shine off fighters, how much do we hear from Błachowicz and Ankalaev during fight week? I didn't hear it.
Not a peep.
Barely anything.
Yeah.
How much more do we hear of Dana White and Paddy Pimblett? Tenfold.
All the time. I know. And even the leaked texts between Lorenzo and Dana really do indicate that this guy doesn't. They text him and tell him what's happening with the UFC. He's not making the decisions behind the scenes. He is a front leading promoter, but I also do question, as a promoter, when he is positive on someone, he does a pretty good job. I'll admit that. When he's negative on Paddy Pimblett, Paddy. I mean, the thing is, he promotes. And that's also another thing with Paddy, Connor. These guys basically promote themselves. You can actually make a pretty good case study that maybe Dana White's not good at promoting. Who has he pushed over the top? Who wouldn't have already done it if some lame bum like me or Scott Coker was promoting him? You know what I mean? Could I have done it better? If I was promoting Connor, I'd look like a genius. If I was promoting Paddy, I'd look like a genius. These guys do it themselves, but I don't know. I don't know. At this point, it's just like I do think the UFC maybe needs a more shiny image, and I know they're going to replace him with some suit, and he's going to be lame. Maybe that's not a bad thing at this point.
But even John Anik, who is seeming to take more and more of a step into the, you know, Dana doesn't go to every UFC event.
Yeah.
What is he doing on a Saturday night where he can't attend the event that he's literally putting money in his back pocket? What are you doing? Now, if he doesn't want to go over to Singapore, if he doesn't want to go over to Australia, if he doesn't want to go over to come over to England, I kind of understand that. With that being said, it's your job. You know, you've got American journalists that are traveling all the way over to Australia on their own money because that's their job. They have to get over there. What he's doing when the UFC on a Saturday night is on in Australia and he's not there, it's what's putting money in your back pocket. Make the effort.
Yeah.
Power slap is not making you the kind of money that the UFC is going to make you. But, you know, Dana White is what he is. And like I said, you know, with John Anik, I'm hoping he's going to be the one that maybe sort of takes over the mantle from Dana, because he seems to genuinely care about, he has a invested interest. Dana White should be in all the fighter meetings, in my opinion, pre-event, to try and get a bit of a feel for the fighter that's going in there. And, you know, so he can speak more legitimately on the fighter in the post-fight press conference. But he for what I understand, he never attends any of these. And, you know, that's obviously the way that he does things. But
yeah, and like, why is it so hard for a promoter with the Francis Ngannou situation? He walked out of the arena with a heavyweight champion that they were in contract negotiations with. At the press conference, someone like you or I, a normal promoter, would have said, you know what, I wish Francis Ngannou all the best, and I hope our discussions go well. He's an absolute stud. Instead, you walked out. Like, this guy, he's not negotiating in the back room. This guy can't, at this point, is too egotistical to do anything, you know?
No, completely. And, you know, there's a reason that Stipe Miocic didn't want Dana White to put the belt around him, and he wanted his coach to put the belt around him, because he respects his coach and he clearly doesn't respect Dana White. And there's a reason now. Here.
Even when Dana was negotiating, George never negotiated with Dana. He said, exactly. I'll talk to Lorenzo. Like, give me the guy in charge, actually.
Exactly. And, you know, there's a reason that Stipe's kind of out of the title picture now.
Yes, absolutely.
Because Dana doesn't want him to be in it. Like you said, if Dana likes you, you get promoted well, you get sort of slightly gimme matchups. Sean O'Malley, Paddy Pimblett, Conor McGregor to a degree.
Yeah.
If Dana doesn't like you, Stipe Miocic won't get the title shot that he arguably deserves. You know, Francis Ngannou, yes, he's been injured, but he's also been sat on the sidelines. There's been no talk about his return. You know, he has been injured, yes, but an injury that's kept him out. You know, he last fought in January, an injury that's kept him out the entire year. You know, he's not fighting in January, he's not fighting in February, he's not fighting in March. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be way over a year before your heavyweight champion has one fight. It's questionable for sure.
But like we've talked about in the past, Gegard Mousasi, number 2 middleweight in the world, and the UFC's like, yeah, whatever, we'll see you later. Anyway, so the UFC, like you said, with Conor and Paddy, the UFC, and we've mentioned this in the past, the UFC will specifically show you how much they respect you by who they match you up with. Conor, in his 4th UFC fight, was co-main eventing or main eventing against Dustin Poirier, a top 10 ranked guy on a win streak in the featherweight division. Before that, all of Conor's fights were hard. And we saw the same thing with Robbie Lawler when he was like 18 years old or 19 or something like that. He was getting really hard fights and struggling because of how much they respected him. Paddy Pimblett, based on his matchmaking, you can accurately, he's getting the Paige Van Zandt treatment of like, we're giving you the softest fights imaginable. You better knock these guys out of the park, right? And it doesn't.
And he doesn't, you know, he beat Vendor O'Malley, yes, he beat Vargas. Yep. Then he had a little step up in competition in Jordan Levitt. But let's be honest, Jordan Levitt isn't a world beater.
He's not top 25. He's like, we're talking top 25-ish kind of guy.
Exactly. You know, Jordan Levitt was 4-1 in the UFC. But if you look at the guys that he beat, you know, so what? The kind of, you know, 3-1 in the UFC, and he had a win on the Contender Series. So it's not exactly like Jordan Levitt was a killer. Now you match him up with Jared Gordon, who won that fight. Jared Gordon beat Paddy Pimblett in my decision. And it's not like Paddy Pimblett is you know, I don't want this to be the bashing of Paddy Pimblett podcast, but it's not like he's a young fighter like a Raul Rosas Jr. who's got 6 fights. He stepped into the octagon the other day at 19-3.
Yep.
He's had plenty of experience, and we now need to push him. but the UFC is still sort of pumping the brakes. And after this, I wouldn't be convinced that they give him a tough fight at all, because they kind of saw, let's be honest, it was pretty clear for all to see that Paddy lost that fight.
Yeah.
I think that it was, if not 30-27, 29-28 in favor of Paddy. Sorry, in favor of Jared Gordon.
Yeah. I had 30-27 as well. I think it was very clear.
I can see a 29-28 if you. I rewatched the fight this morning. That rear naked choke in the second round lasted for 14 seconds. That's not a legitimate fight-ending sequence, in my opinion.
Right.
Paddy has a clear hole of being absolutely slammed with left hooks.
That hasn't changed. That's been his flaw since he debuted in the UFC, and he has not worked to improve it. You can go back to our old shows, and we're talking about his left hook issues.
Exactly. And, this is why I don't think anybody's going to be scared to fight Paddy Pimblett. Everyone will be absolutely sticking their hand up and saying, give me Paddy Pimblett, because there is a hole there. Now, slightly jumping forward to the Ilia Topuria-Bryce Mitchell fight, who did you have winning the first round of that fight?
I think I maybe had Bryce Mitchell winning. It was just like he was slightly more digging with the proper kicks. I did have Bryce Mitchell winning, but it seemed like Ilia Topuria was taking the momentum. But in terms of like strikes given, strikes taken, maybe Bryce Mitchell won, honestly, that first round.
If you watch that, if you look at the state of Bryce Mitchell after that, I think Ilia Topuria landed more damaging strikes.
Yeah.
Jared Gordon landed almost double the amount of strikes of Ilia Topuria. He landed almost in the first rounds of their respective fights. He landed more significant strikes than Bryce Mitchell in their first round.
But here's the weird thing. The judges gave a bad decision. 2 of them gave the first round to Paddy. The first round.
That's for me. I tweeted and I made a mistake. So if anyone's checked my Twitter, I'd say the first round's a swing round. I made a mistake with that. The second round for me is a swing round, where it could have gone Paddy, it could have gone Jared.
Sure.
I still think Jared Gordon won that round. The third round, despite all the control, there was no damage sort of inflicted in that third round. So then we have to go to the second criteria, the duration, which Jared Gordon had almost 4 minutes of control time in that round.
Yep.
Yes, Paddy probably landed the more damaging shot, so you could give that last round to Paddy. But they weren't damaged. There wasn't enough damaging shots to warrant giving it to Paddy. He started well in the first round. The first minute of the first round, he started well with the kicks, and he was, he came out fast. But then Jared Gordon instantly found his range with that left hook. If you break it down minute by minute, Jared Gordon wins that fight.
Absolutely.
And it's just, I think it's a really, really bad decision. And frustratingly, we're going to be talking about it this week. And as soon as the new year hits, and as soon as the next Paddy Pimblett fight week, he's 4-0 in the UFC.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We don't talk about all these. He's not 3 and a bad decision. He's 4-0. And for Paddy, Jared Gordon, that's halved the amount of money that he's got. That is literally cut the amount of money that he has in half. For Paddy, it's double the amount of money because he's got a favourable decision.
Yeah.
And then you've got a match Paddy Pimblett up next, which, like I say, I don't think will be tough to match him up, because for me, there's a massive hole in his game that many, many people will want to exploit. And yeah, I think they'll give him. I think he should be fighting up. He should be looking at. Arguably at 4-0. He is 4-0, not 3 and a bad decision. He is 4-0. So should he be looking at a ranked opponent? In my opinion, he should.
Terrence McKinney's called him out a bunch. Everybody has, in fact, called this man out a bunch of times. But yeah, Jake Paul's been calling him out. Jake Paul knocks him out, no problem,
without a doubt. And if I just look at the top 15, Paddy doesn't match up well with any of these fights. 15, Tony Ferguson.
I might pick Tony. Sadly,
I pick Tony 100% in that fight. I have no issue picking Tony in that fight. He's got an awkward style. He's got a gas tank. Paddy seemed to be fading slightly in that final round. If Paddy takes him down, Tony, despite what he shows, is good off his back.
Yeah, true. He's tough.
McGregor would never happen, but McGregor, if Jared Gordon's landing a left hook on him, McGregor's knocking him out within 2 minutes.
Absolutely.
Renato Moicano knocks him out. Ismagulov, obviously he's matched with Arman Sarukian. that's
Takes
a
care of
rough fight. Dan Hooker even said, I don't want to fight this guy, not because I'm scared of him, because, come on. Like,
Ben
Jalen
Hooker would kill him.
Jalen Turner absolutely kills him.
Yeah.
And then for what the topology rankings are worth, Paddy's 23.
Sure.
Brad Riddell is 25. Brad Riddell handles him pretty well.
Yeah,
in my opinion. Matt Frivola, 2 TKOs in a row. That's a competitive fight, in my opinion, Matt Frivola. I think they match him up. Maybe a Drew Dober. But
Drew Dober beats him.
But Drew Dober beats him. But he's a recognizable name. He's fringe top 10. He's never quite made it. Bobby Green, obviously Drew Dober's fighting Bobby Green this weekend, but Bobby Green, I think, is an exciting fight.
On the feet.
They keep
Bobby Green wins.
Exactly, and they keep the UFC and Dana White, who actually will matchmake for this fight, are not stupid. They keep him away from the likes of, looking up the rankings. The guy Diego Ferreira doesn't do anything. He's coming off a 3-loss streak. You can't do that. Drakkar Klose, I think, would be a competitive fight.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Joel Alvarez, that is a difficult fight for Paddy Pimblett. He's a lot taller than Pimblett. He's got a slick strike and he's slick on the ground. They keep him away from Gregor Gillespie because they don't want that smoke. And then Dan Hooker, Grant Dawson, Renato Moicano, Jalen Turner, and then you're into the Michael Chandlers and the Gamrots of this world.
Yeah,
I think the next fight for Paddy is either, like you say, a Terence McKinney, if he can get through his next fight, a Matt Frivola.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if Matt Frivola... No, he's not matched up at the moment, obviously. He only won a couple of weeks ago.
Sure, perfect.
Do they give him a Bahamundez so they can just replay that spinning back kick of Roosevelt Roberts and say, look how dangerous this guy is? I don't know. But, it's not going to be hard to match Paddy, because there will be 100 155ers putting their hat in the ring and saying, give me Paddy Pimblett, I can beat Paddy Pimblett.
Yeah. But
the difficulty, I think, will come where, how do you match Paddy Pimblett? Do you give him a wrestler? Because he's good on the ground, but then, Gregor Gillespie mauls him? Do you give him a striker where, he clearly got holes? And it doesn't seem like he's, like you said, we said way back in the day, there's a hole in his game. It's a left hook. And yet he hasn't shored up. He hasn't fixed that flaw in his game, which is going to come around to bite him in the ass.
Teddy Atlas said on Twitter, it's good to have a tough chin. It's better to keep that a secret. Nobody should know that you have a good chin.
Exactly. And, even the matchmaking in this one, yes, Jared Gordon's a tough test for him, but Jared Gordon, I don't think has recorded a TKO since 2017.
And he was hitting him, and he had a height and reach disadvantage, and was slapping him.
If you look at all of Jared Gordon's wins, aside from one, have been a unanimous decision. So he doesn't have knockout power, unfortunately. And if he did...
Bless you.
Oh, I'm allergic to bullshit.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Bullshit decisions. I'm allergic to bullshit decisions. But if he did have knockout power, maybe he finishes Paddy Pimblett.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Those left hooks were solid.
They were landing well.
Yeah.
And someone with legitimate knockout power would have probably finished him, in my opinion. That's taking nothing away from Jared Gordon, because, like I say, he won the fight, but he could have potentially even gotten out there and put a stamp on that if he had knockout power. But, it is what it is with that, I guess.
I have nothing else to add. Jared Gordon clearly won that fight. The Paddy hype train is in a much worse state than it was before. He's lost goodwill of the MMA community, of the MMA fandom, which isn't so bad. But he's lost, he lost a fight here.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Not like a top 10. We're not talking about Michael Bisping and Matt Hamill having a close fight for a spot for the next contender. We're talking about like a fringe top 25 guy that you didn't beat the hell out of.
Exactly.
It's not a good look.
If you compare this to I don't like doing this, but you compare that to Conor McGregor's rise.
Oh my God. Israel Adesanya is like any of these guys. The UFC clearly respected them based on matchmaking. Tell us. Who was it? Marcus Brimage.
McGregor was, Marcus Brimage, I think, was he competed on tough, and he got the knockout of the night. Second fight, Max Holloway.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, went to decision, but McGregor popped his knee out in that one. Yep. And you could clearly see it, and he was out for a prolonged period of time. Diego Brandao.
So talented.
A tough winner. And then you look at Diego Brandal's record since. He's gone on to fight ACA, Fight Nights Global, Rising. Yes, he's picked up a lot of losses, but he's a talented guy. And he had a good ground game, which would test McGregor.
Yep.
Then you got Dustin Poirier at 178. Yep. Then you go on to Dennis Seaver, who...
Yeah, that's a soft.
It was a bit of a gimme, but it was a main event.
Yep.
And then you go on to Chad Mendes, and then you go on to Jose Aldo, and then you just go on to the stratospheric Nate Diaz, Eddie Alvarez, Khabib. But
it got wild, yeah.
There was, you kind of give him a winnable fight in that first fight with Marcus Brimage, and then you give him a killer in Max Holloway, who isn't the Max Holloway that we sort of know and love now.
Yeah.
But Max is more experienced in the UFC. He had 4 fights in the UFC. He was coming off a split decision loss to Dennis Bermudez, and he was about 15 at the time that they fought. This is not the Max Holloway that we know and love. But the favourable matchmaking for Conor McGregor didn't exist, in my opinion. The favourable matchmaking for Ronda Rousey to get a debut against Liz Carmouche is not an easy fight. Israel Adesanya to go up against Rob Wilkinson, who now looks like an absolute killer. Israel Adesanya, I think his second fight might have been against Marvin Vettori.
No, I just brought it up. Yeah. So Rob Wilkinson, he debuted against Marvin Vettori, Brad Tavares, Derek Brunson.
Decent.
What? Clearly they respected him. They clearly respected, based on the matchmaking, they thought this kid is so good. And they were right.
I mean, you look at Rob Wilkinson, Marvin Vettori, Brad Tavares, just those 3 fights. And then you look at Vendramani, Vargas, and Jordan Levitt.
I know.
Rob Wilkinson's gone on to be a millionaire and dominate in the PFL. Marvin Vettori has gone on to later compete for the title. Brad Tavares has gone on to be one of them. Unfortunately, he's a bit of a gatekeeper now, but he is, one of the most recognizable names. He's a perennial top 15, top 20 guy in the middleweight division.
Yep.
With the greatest respect, is Jordan Levitt, is Vendramani, is Vargas, are they going to go on to dominate in the PFL? No, Brendan Loughnane wipes the floor with all of them. It is what it is, I guess. But
it was a tough weekend. Weirdly enough, Paddy was the only real English win this weekend. It was a tough one. Again, penalties are just not doing it for England. But let's move on to Darren Till. He wrote a great article about how to get Darren Till back into a winning state, and it's a sad article to read and to write, because it needs to be said that his skills haven't progressed all that much. Like, what did he do the last year for wrestling training with Hamza? He's still doing the same thing. I'll do it right now. I think that's the same kind of
exactly.
Yeah.
I think the worst thing to happen to him was against Bojan Vilicevic back in the day. I think that was in I can't remember where that was. It was a European card, I believe.
Okay. That's a
Volkov versus Struve. Where are we looking here? Volkov versus Struve.
And again, Darren Till, you can see on his matchmaking how much they respected Darren Till.
Exactly. It was in Rotterdam. Bojan Vilicevic, he lands a wicked stepping elbow. He lands a wicked stepping elbow in Gdansk against Donald Cerrone. He lands that wicked stepping elbow against Robert Whittaker.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he has no takedown defense. So when he lands that stepping elbow, he gets so close to his opponent. Mm-hmm. He steps in and steps his whole weight into that shot. If your opponent, like we saw Duplessis do this weekend, drop your weight, take him down. It was so easy for Dricus to get the takedown. Yes, he was maybe suffering an ACL injury that we heard after the fight, but it's so disappointing for Darren Till, because I do think that he is a quality fighter. He's one of the better stand-up fighters in the middleweight division, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
He was having Dricus Duplessis on the floor. Jesus, no, he wasn't. On the feet. On the floor, he was getting absolutely dominated. That first round, I think the significant strikes was 60 to 6 significant strikes, 82 to 9 total strikes.
Yep.
Almost 4 minutes of control time for Dricus Duplessis, who's not known as an elite sort of wrestler. His top game's strong.
Yes.
But if you look at his UFC record, KO against Brad Tavares, pretty much all played out on the feet. Wasn't a single takedown in that one, And then he lands 6 takedowns against Darren Till, who supposedly trains him with Hamzat Chimaev.
What has he been doing for the last year? Where's the takedown?
It's so disappointing. Like I say, maybe the injury did prevent him from being able to stay on his feet. But I think to the degree that he was taken down, in the manner that he was taken down, It's just really disappointing because we haven't seen any progression from Darren Till. Now, in the article that I wrote, opponents landed 3 takedowns on Darren Till up until the Tyron Woodley fight. One of them was Donald Cerrone, which I don't even recall, and Cerrone 29 seconds control time. 2 of those takedowns were landed by Nicholas Dalby, both of which came in the 3rd round when Darren Till was injured. He'd popped his shoulder out. So 3 takedowns up until the Tyron Woodley fight. Since the Tyron Woodley fight, he's been taken down, I think, 15 times. 6 against Dricus. So 15, 11, 12, my apology, 13 times. Still doesn't make for good reading.
No.
But then you have to bring in the question, he's clearly trained in takedown defense. He knows the flaw in his game. We saw it against Derek Brunson when he was taken down 3 times, dominated the rear naked choke. We've now seen it again against Dricus du Plessis, 3rd loss in a row, up at middleweight. He knows the flaw. And he said in that sort of video on his Instagram or his Twitter or whatever it was that he doesn't understand why his gym form isn't translating over into the octagon. So that was this. So the first, alluding to my article, the first way that you can sort of fix Darren Till is to train takedown defense, because
that's a real thing too. Of like Chael Sonnen's talked about him. Some guys in the gym are amazing, and then for whatever reason they just can't get that mentally in the octagon.
So maybe see a sports psychologist to really get to the root cause of he is hesitant, and I think maybe the hesitancy has come from being dropped. He was barely. I don't even think he was dropped in his career prior to. No, he wasn't. Prior to the Tyron Woodley fight, he was not dropped in his UFC career. He gets dropped by Tyron Woodley in that 2nd round because he rushed in, tried to land a big looping left hook. Woodley obviously had the short straight and knocked him down. He was then savagely knocked out by Jorge Masvidal. I think that's made him gun shy. I really do think that's made him slightly hesitant, because this isn't the old Darren Till. That 2nd round against Dricus du Plessis seemed to be a little bit of the old Darren Till. He was landing the stepping elbow. He was landing the long looping shots. He's obviously seen the flaw in his own game that he gets taken down a lot. So he's not throwing these spinning back fists, which he kind of became synonymous for early on in his career. But the old Darren Till was almost back. So, and he's training well in the gym. He's gone over to Thailand. He's training with Brendan Loughnane, who he did a phenomenal job in the corner, in my opinion, Brendan Loughnane, and I want to see more of his corner work. But why does that not transition over to the octagon? See a sports psychologist. There's no harm in seeing a sports psychologist and just seeing if there is a legitimate reason. I'm scared of being knocked out. I'm scared of being taken down. Since that knockout, it was a devastating knockout for me in front of my home fans. It's supposed to be my comeback, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
But then the third thing for me is he's far too small to be a middleweight. Dricus du Plessis said it. Yes, he is massive. Dricus du Plessis is a big ball of muscle. But if you look at the 2 fights, he's had 4 fights at middleweight, of which 2 have been against former welterweights. Kelvin Gastelum landed 1 of 4 takedowns on him.
Yeah.
Robert Whittaker landed 2 of 13. So Till was able to use that size advantage that he has over these guys, because he was the bigger guy in both of those fights, to be able to stop the takedown. And then you compare that to Derek Brunson. Derek Brunson took him down 3 times. Wasn't able to stop the takedown. Dricus du Plessis 6 times out of 6. He's too small to be at middleweight.
Yeah.
But is he too big to make it down to 170 again? Those weight cuts were brutal, but I'm not sure, now that he's training out in Thailand, whether he can get his body weight just down so that he doesn't have to endure such a brutal cut. I don't know. I don't think we'll see him at 170. I think he drops out. Looking at looking at the rankings at middleweight, he's gone. Well, I don't think they haven't been updated because he's still above Dricus du Plessis, but he drops down to probably 14, maybe even out the rankings, And you look at the guys in the rankings above him; they're all tough fights, from Chris Curtis, Imanov. I mean, Gastelum, he's already fought. Andre Muniz.
He possibly
Chris Curtis fight,
But he might Chris Curtis might knock him out. I don't know.
Exactly. So it's really difficult for Darren Till. It's a difficult run of form that he's on. Do the UFC even maybe cut him? he goes and fights on a regional or a smaller circuit, and then comes back to the UFC because he's not old. He's 30. He's 29 years old, 30 years old at the end of the month.
I can see that.
But again, then who does he fight on the, what regional circuit does he fight for? And who does he fight? He's too big for Cage Warriors. He's headlined the UFC event. He's too big for Cage Warriors. Does he sign a couple of one-fight contracts with maybe PFL in Europe, or does he fight, for Bellator on a one-fight contract or two-fight contract? KSW even would probably take him.
I was going to say KSW, but I think he gets beat by Ramazanov, or Magomed Kaladov. Like, who is he going to beat in KSW? These guys are going to wrestle him.
It's difficult. UAE Warriors, but that's too small a show for him. It's difficult. It's difficult for Darren Till at the moment. But regardless of where he fights next, whether it's in the UFC, whether it's not, I'm always going to be a fan of his because he kind of was the next British hope before Leon Edwards, after Dan Hardy, after Michael Bisping,
after Terry Adam.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And luckily now Leon Edwards,
he did it.
He broke over. With the greatest respect, we've spoken a lot about him. Paddy Pimblett's not getting anywhere near the top 10 in my opinion, let alone a title shot.
We overestimate. We said maybe top 5 in his career would be the high point. If he keeps fighting like that, it's not even going to be.
It's not going to happen. Yeah.
No,
so it's disappointing as a we're fans of Darren Till's fighting style because, like you say, he's got a unique style where he uses elbows, he uses knees, but this is mixed martial arts. If you haven't got a takedown defense, you're going to lose fights, which was evident on Saturday night. Dricus du Plessis, and I can't lie. I saw your tweet. I slightly disagree with that Dricus du Plessis can make the top 5. I don't think Dricus du Plessis is a great fighter. I think he's poor. But
well, let's talk about it because I think the thing is that losing to Dricus du Plessis, it probably ages okay. I think in a year and a half, he might be in that top 5. I know you disagree, but give me a second. But I think it's one of those like this doesn't age as poorly on a record as like this guy's on the up and up right now. The thing is with Darren Till, it's not the name that he lost against. It is how he lost this person, in that he's really not showing any new improvements. We know that there was clear holes in his game, and those holes may have gotten worse, in all honesty. He's not showing improvements in that area. But yeah, I have faith in Dricus du Plessis. His biggest flaw is how wide his chest is, that he has the Brock Lesnar issue that he can't throw punches because he like, you know what I mean, of like to bring his arm across his body and punch someone, his chest is so wide that it looks kind of dorky and kind of funny, but he does like drive-by punchings where he skate in and out. It looks like he's skating in a way. His top is pretty strong. I think honestly he's top 5. He looks messy, but I think
he looks messy, but it's clearly effective. He's 4-0 in the UFC with 4 good names on his record and 4 good finishes.
Keep in mind of how
good performances. Sorry,
but like it's maybe you're thinking he's in a different division. He's at middleweight. You know what
True.
I mean? Give him like him and Alex Pereira. Does Dricus du Plessis just ground and pound him right now? Kind of thing.
The thing is, Darren Till, you match him up with Israel Adesanya, you match him up with Jared Cannonier, you match him up with Alex Pereira. They're competitive fights, but it's getting to that point. You've got to beat a Derek Brunson who will wrestle you. You've got to beat a Marvin Vettori who will probably ground out of a decision. You've got to beat a Jack Manson that will probably take him down. Darren Till can probably beat, or can have a competitive fight with Alex Pereira. He can have a competitive fight with Israel Adesanya, but he can't get there because he can't beat a Derek Brunson. He can't beat a Jack Manson at the moment. He can't beat a Roman Delozzi. Interestingly enough, Dricus du Plessis has less professional fights than Paddy Pimblett. And look at the names he's already fought: Marcus Perez, Trevin Giles, Brad Tavares, and now Darren Till.
Roberto Soldic is on that. Like, it's just like these are good names. And in the UFC, like you said, those ones. Yeah, absolutely.
And yet he's had less fights than Paddy Pimblett, who's been given 3 gimmies and a tough test in Gordon.
Yeah.
And I don't know how old Dricus du Plessis is. 1994. Paddy Pimblett was born in 1995, so they're a year apart. It's not like one of these guys is considerably younger, and yes, he's had a lot of fights on the regional circuit.
Yep.
As you're alluding to, Dricus du Plessis' ceiling, in my opinion, is already probably a top 8 guy now.
He's got 7. He has to be in the top 10, but it's just not up to date at this point.
Exactly.
But, I think career-wise, he could do top 5, but it's based on matchmaking and how crappy middleweight is. Middleweight sucks.
Imagine him versus Paulo Costa. That'd be carnage.
Yeah, True, absolutely.
Neither guy is a crisp striker. They're both power strikers, and both guys are jacked. So both go absolutely crazy for 5 minutes, have the second round off, and then go crazy in the final round.
Yeah.
Why not? I'm here for it. But we've got 49 minutes through, and we haven't even spoken about the main event.
I'll just do a quick couple of notes on the main event of how frustrating it was. But like, there's not a lot to say. But the problem is that neither of these guys, Jan Błachowicz and Magomed Ankalaev, neither of them could. We talk about some divisions are low skill, and it's not always clear what we're exactly talking about. But this was number one fighting number two, and like Magomed was throwing a jab, and I'll give very specific examples. Magomed was throwing a jab that Jan then parried, and Magomed couldn't figure anything else out. Like, he couldn't figure out, like, your opponent is parrying every time you jab. You know what your opponent's going to do. They're acting predictably. So you can use that to your advantage. But instead, that was like the end of his thought sequence. Same with Jan Błachowicz. Those leg kicks would have TKO'd him. Like, that was almost a TKO. But because he was being clinched, he couldn't figure out any way to get back to what he was doing. It was just like, stage one isn't working, so I have no idea what to do in stage two. Magomed looked like a genius for going for a takedown. That was in layer two. This is the number one and number two. I mean, the UFC we're kind of like, why did they delegitimize their own belt by doing something else? I mean, we're not loving this fight. Frazer, please enlighten me.
I completely agree. I think the decision to be a draw questionable, but also
might as well have been at this point. Like,
are you
what a fight?
Quite literally, by this time next week, are you going to remember this fight? Absolutely not. I don't care for this fight. I didn't think it was a great fight. The first 2 rounds, maybe even the first 3, were exciting rounds. And I think Ankalaev is lucky that this was a 5-round fight, because he, if this was still the co-main event, if Glover was still on the card against Jiri, or even if they'd bumped Jamal Hill to that main event slot, which would have been weird, but it is what it is. Ankalaev loses that fight 2-1, in my opinion. I think the decision should have gone, in my opinion, to Ankalaev 3-2. I think he lost the second and third rounds just due to the damage that he was clearly compromised on those leg kicks. And like we always say, and we go on about the criteria, the damage is the most important factor. But like you say, the fact that his game plan was, I'm going to strike with this guy. Okay, I'm struggling to strike with this guy because he's eating up my legs. My next game plan is to work takedowns. That he just completely abandoned his first game plan. He didn't, he wasn't looking at adapting. There was no, for me, especially for Jan Błachowicz, there was no adaptation. You knew that Jan Błachowicz had a flaw in the takedowns. My keys to victory: avoid the takedown, keep you back off the fence. What did he do in those final 2 rounds? Got taken down because his back was on the fence. He wasn't taken down in the middle of the octagon. His back was up against it. His shoulders were up against the fence for pretty much the entire last 10 minutes. Yep. And the interesting thing is, I still think Ankalaev is probably the best fighter in the division, but he just doesn't show it. But now there is again, like Paddy Pimblett, there is a flaw in Ankalaev's game, which is his ability to take a low kick. And yes, Jan Błachowicz has got one of the best low kicks in the middleweight division.
Yeah.
But I'd be fascinated between a Jiri Prochazka and a Magomed Ankalaev fight. Like, how does that fight go? Because Prochazka is far better at defending the takedown than Jan Błachowicz. Yes, he was taken down a lot against Glover and largely controlled, but I still think his takedown defense is better than Ankalaev's. If you match Ankalaev up with Glover Teixeira, I think he probably beats him. But if you match him up with an Alexander Rakic, does he beat Alexander Rakic, who's got good takedown defense, who's solid on the feet, and as long as his body can hold up, he looked like he was maybe going to go on to defeat Jan Błachowicz. Yeah. And like we say, the legitimacy of the main, I don't even know if it'll be the main event or if it will go in as the co-main event for 283, Glover Teixeira versus Jamal Hill.
This belt is a mess. This division's a mess. Holy.
At one point there was a call for Alex Pereira versus Khamzat Chimaev to fight at light heavyweight for the belt. I mean, what are we doing?
It might as well be like what? Whatever.
Yeah. Jamal Hill, no disrespect to him, because he has been given an opportunity. If you're offered a fight to fight for the belt after you're supposed to be fighting the number 7. So he's number 7. You're supposed to be fighting number 6. If you're offered a chance to fight for the belt,
take it. Absolutely,
take it.
Yeah.
He's got one loss in the UFC to Paul Craig. Craig snapped his arm and tapped him out.
Yep.
Since that, he beat Jimmy Crute, he beat Johnny Walker, he beat Thiago Santos, finished all of those guys.
Yep.
Before that, he finished over Vincent Peru. Before that, he finished Kidson Abreu and was pot for marijuana. And then he beat Darko Stosic by decision, and he won on the Contender Series by TKO. That resume, Jimmy Crute, Johnny Walker, and Thiago Santos, I'm not mad about him getting a title shot at all.
No, not really.
With that being said, why are we making it for January, and why are we making it that quickly after the main event? Arguably, there should just be a rematch for the belt, but then that puts Glover in a difficult position. I think, what difference does it make if the belt is vacant from? It's been vacant from sort of the middle of, let's say it's been vacant from December 1st.
Yeah.
And now a champion will be crowned on, what date is this card? January 21st.
Because the UFC thinks we're all lizards of like, we can't be interested in a fight unless there's a belt on it. Like, that's legitimately all their thought process was. We can't have.
It's not even that. It's the fact that it's, why not wait until February or April?
I know.
Because Glover wants to fight in Rio, which I'm not mad about. Of course he does. He's a Brazilian guy who wants to fight in Rio de Janeiro.
I agree with him.
But if you're Figueiredo Moreno, you're probably watching Moreno, I think, was cage side doing the commentary for the Spanish Spanish broadcast.
Yeah,
he sat there. He's probably watched the main event, thinking, "Oh fucking hell! Draw a bit contentious to Ankalaev would have won." Maybe he flicks onto Twitter later. Hang about, I've gone from main event. I'm now co-main event. What the fuck? He doesn't know what's happening. None of the guys on the card know what's happening. Ankalaev and Jan Błachowicz are probably expecting, okay, we drew, we'll rematch for the belt in April. Maybe it's co-main event in London in March, depending on,
It's a tough sell.
I don't want to see that rematch. I don't have to see the rematch. I think Ankalaev won. Jan Błachowicz thinks Ankalaev won. Ankalaev thinks Ankalaev won.
Yeah, I don't care.
Kadyrov or whatever his name is.
Yeah, Kadyrov.
Yeah.
On his Telegram server or something weird. MMA is dumb sometimes. Like, the sport is just stupid.
But it's difficult. What do you do with Ankalaev next? Who he doesn't fight Yuri Prochazka because Prochazka comes in and fights for the belt. Does he fight the loser of Glover Teixeira versus Jamal Hill in a I don't know. Does he fight that? Jan Błachowicz, like we say, we don't want to see that rematch. Alexander Rakic potentially, but he's coming off a loss. Ankalaev's arguably coming off a win, but it's gone down as a draw. It's just beat Anthony Smith, and then you're not facing a Krylov or a Paul Craig or an Ozdemir or Ryan Spann. These guys aren't really in the conversation at the moment, and it's a strange one. Jamal Hill to get the title shot. Like I say, I don't mind it because he's got 3 really good wins all by knockout, but you can't tell me that he was expecting a call.
This division is so weak. Holy crap. Like, looking down the rankings, it's just this is as good as the UFC could make. I would have liked something a little bit more fun and creative, but they just very quickly, like, we need a main event with a belt. But if your champion drops out due to injury, what about like just hosting a Grand Prix? I don't know, just something really fun. I don't know. Like, I know divisions do function like a tournament when they're working anyway. They're all tournament brackets anyhow. But just declaring it makes it creative, makes it fun, makes us interested. But instead, we're just like, okay, so Jamal Hill's fighting for a belt. Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's just why this was. I mean, it's a good job it wasn't, because obviously it landed in a draw, ended in a draw. But why was it not Ankalaev versus Błachowicz, Teixeira versus Jamal Hill? Not for neither the belt. The winner of this faces the winner of this for the belt. And then the winner of that eventually fights Yuri Prochazka further down the line, because he is the champion. He never lost a belt. He voluntarily gave up the belt because of injury. Yeah. Logic. Just use a bit of logic here. But like, even if, did they think that they had to boost the 283 card? Because I'm just looking down it now. That's probably straight away on UFC stats as the main event. Figueiredo versus Moreno 12 or whatever the fight is, 24 or however many fights. It's a solid fight. It's an exciting fight. It's a really good fight. So that's now co-main event. Gilbert Burns versus Neil Magny. That's fine at co-main event, especially in Rio de Janeiro with Gilbert Burns being Brazilian. Jessica Andrade versus Lauren Murphy. Again,
Great
Andrade is Brazilian, so that makes sense. Probably potentially for a number one contender spot again. Shogun's on the card. Johnny Walker versus Paul Craig. Brad Tavares versus fucking Gregory Rodriguez. Robocop. Thiago Morrison versus Kutaladze. You know, and then it gets a little bit dicey the further we go down. Valerie Alves is on the card. No, is that no neck? No neck Nunes is on the card. We love her. You know, but at the end of the day, you know, Terrence McKinney's on the card. This was not a terrible card. So I don't know. I think Dana White just panicked. He saw that fight and he panicked.
Yeah.
Even if Ankalaev would have won, he's not the most exciting. It definitely wasn't the most exciting fight we've ever seen. He's got a little bit of a history now of grinding out fights. He's not quite the killer that we thought he was. You know, he lost obviously in his debut, then he knockout, then a decision, then a knockout, then a knockout, then a knockout. But then he's gone decision against Krylov, decision against Ozdemir, decision against Santos. He did beat Anthony Smith, but Anthony Smith broke his leg in that one or had a pretty serious injury in that one. Now he's a split draw against Jan Błachowicz. He's not quite the exciting finisher that we thought we may have on our hands. Maybe Dana White just panicked on the night. And like we say, Dana White probably didn't make the decision, but I think, you know, he probably spoke to his people. But there's no way that you get a fight contract from... Jamal Hill claims that he was offered the fight when the guys were still in the octagon. Now, that's not a contracted fight. Let's not get mistaken that it wasn't official when he got the call. He got the call to say, would you be interested in taking on Glover? Of course I would. Glover Teixeira, would you be interested in taking on... You were supposed to fight the number one ranked, the best light heavyweight in the world. We offered Ankalaev. We then, you said that you take on... Do you want to take on the 7th ranked guy? No disrespect to Jamal Hill, that's just where he is in the rankings. Glover, of course I do. Of course he's going to take that fight. And, you know, like I say, of course it wasn't official on Saturday night, but if it comes out of Dana White's mouth like that, it's done. And it's, you know, it's on all the socials now. It's widely reported. We reported on it. You know, I wrote an article on that on Sunday morning. It's done. The fight is done. They are fighting next month in, you know, what's the date today? The 11th or something today? I don't know.
283s, 6 weeks away.
Yeah, so 6 weeks away, Jamal Hill's getting a title opportunity, having been scheduled to fight Anthony Smith. I hope they're weighing in Anthony Smith to make wicked and, you know, replacing Jamal Hill. Who do they replace him with? I don't know.
Doesn't matter. That division sucks. Honestly, like Alex Pereira could be champion. Like, the might as well.
Exactly. The division's a mess, but, you know, it is what it is. It's a difficult one because does Jamal Hill really deserve a title shot?
No, but the division's so bad.
Yeah, but if you look at the guys that he's beat, perhaps he does. You know, they're good guys that he's beat. Finishing Thiago Santos, something that not a lot of people do.
Yeah,
finish of Johnny Walker and the finish of Jimmy Crute. You know, it's they're solid wins. He needed the Anthony Smith win. If he would have finished Anthony Smith, then he deserves a title shot. He never got to that stage because he was offered the fight. And you know, fair play to Jamal Hill. He'll probably go on. He's the favourite to go on and beat Teixeira, and he might be champion at the start of 2023. If you would have, you know, if you would have told me that he would have been the champion at the beginning of 2023, by the time February hits, I would have called you out to say, you know, there's some sort of there's something dodgy going on here. But you know, it is what it is. Fair play to him, and he's obviously grabbed the opportunity with both hands.
Yeah, and good for him. That's what this game is about. It's just the UFC, I think all these things compounded at the same time with the gambling investigations. There is, like Jack Slack was saying, there's a crisis of confidence. If this was a prime minister or a CEO with public shareholders, we would start questioning what's going on at the top, because there's too many events rapidly that happened December and November. Honestly, and it was an okay year for the UFC. It was fine. It was no 2021. I'll tell you that much. 2022 was just okay, and we'll do a year in review on the next episode, and then we'll probably just wrap up the show until 2023. But yeah, I think it was a pretty good year for the UFC. Like the big storylines were Leon Edwards and stuff like that, and the gambling scandal. But yeah, it was no 2021. I'll say that much.
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely a quieter year. But even, you know, this card had Uriel Rosa Jr., you know, looked phenomenal on this card. You know, just finishing off this card.
I scan out. What was he born in 2000? What year was this young man born? That's insane. 2000 and...
He was born in 2004. 2004.
Unbelievable.
That's when he was born. He wasn't training straight away.
No.
You know? And yet,
2004. He missed the Pride Grand Prix. Unbelievable.
But even everything from his walkout to his performance, he's not 18. In his head, he's not 18. That walkout, he's going, he's patting down all the crowd. He's wearing the big Mexican sombrero. He gets on the mic. He sort of plays up to the crowd.
He's cute. He's cute on the mic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he needs a little bit of molding on the old promotion. But I think he's going to be a world champion.
Probably. It's very hard not to be.
I don't see him being a world champion at bantamweight because he looks quite big. But he's going to compete at bantamweight. He's going to compete at featherweight. He's probably going to compete at lightweight. He's 18 years old and he's 135 pounds and picking up Jay Perrin like it's nobody's business. Ilia Topuria, I thought, was probably the performance of the card.
Yeah, amazing.
They
Just
keep
incredible.
him away from Paddy Pimblett because he
Kills him.
deals with Paddy Pimblett pretty handily.
There's an intensity to Ilia Topuria. He wants to
Exactly.
finish fights. He's intense in there, and love to see it.
Bryce Mitchell came out, says that he had the flu this week and it affected his performance. I don't like that from Bryce. I think regardless of the flu, the flu didn't stop your head movement.
Okay.
Straight up.
Yeah.
Biggie boy, Jairzinho Rosenstruik. Good God. The guy, the fight lasted 23 seconds. The guy threw 21 significant strikes, including getting pretty badly jabbed straight in the face by Chris Dricus.
Yep.
He landed that running, jumping, both feet that sort of Alistair Overeem knockout punch was also the knockout punch that he landed on Chris Dricus, which is
I know.
He shouldn't be able to generate that power from running and jumping and almost inside gloving it, but he did. And Chris Dricus, I want to see him at 205.
Sure.
Take the first 6 months of 2023 off, get yourself down to 205. He's not a 265. Getting hit by Biggie Boy isn't going to be nice for anyone, but especially when you have a significant weight disadvantage. We saw Edmund Shabazian get back in the win column. Mm-hmm. Not all that convincingly, in my opinion. Sure. But again, he's another guy that doesn't quite seem to live up to the hype that we maybe build him at. Chris Curtis versus Joaquin Buckley. I was surprised to see Chris Curtis as the underdog in that one, but he was losing the fight until he wasn't, in a way. But
it's a highlight.
Joaquin Buckley, I think for Joaquin Buckley, he throws so much power into every shot, but they almost exclusively land on the guard of all of his opponents. If he threw 10 less punches, but was more accurate with all his punches, I think he'd be far higher up in the division. And for me, fight of the night was Billy Q versus Alexander Hernandez. Yes, Darren Till put on a great performance, but Billy Q and Alexander Hernandez love this fight. Alexander Hernandez made 145 with ease, and I think that probably took a bit out of him. I think Billy Q, why more people aren't talking about Billy Q? He does pick up these losses, but he picks up losses to Gavin Tucker, he picks up losses to Shane Burgos. These are not bad guys.
True.
And then when he does finish fights, finished a fight on the Contender Series, submitted his opponent in his debut, TKO'd Kyle Nelson, TKO'd Gabriel Benitez, TKO'd Alexander Hernandez. This guy is one of the most exciting fighters for me at featherweight. And, I'm excited. Billy Q versus Bryce Mitchell, book it. I'm keen for that fight.
Yeah.
It's an exciting fight. Billy Q is one of my favourite fighters to watch because he's a cardio machine. He just comes, he brings it, and he throws down for as long as it lasts. If he gets finished, he gets finished. If he finishes his opponent, happy days for him. But he's a really exciting fighter, and I think he's got a massive 2023 ahead of him.
We powered through it. We got through the rest of UFC 282 somehow. Like I said, we're not going to be covering Strickland Cannonier. There's nothing fresh we can say about it anyway. Sarukian Ismagulov is a good fight. Yeah,
it's a card. There's a few really good fights on the card. Definitely watch it because there's a few really good fights on the card. We've got the return of Corey McKenna from a British perspective. Obviously she's Welsh, but she fights out of America, and Bobby Green, Drew Dober, and like you were alluding to then, Sarukian and Ismagulov.
That's a good
for me should be the main event, but
yeah, I know why.
Cannonier, Strickland are slightly bigger names, unfortunately, to the casual fan, and all because Sean Strickland has the ability to talk to his opponent while he's in the octagon. No,
he showered with an AK-47 in that one video. It's just, Sean Strickland's right on the edge of like, I don't know if you're actually purposefully funny or you're kind of just dumb. Like I really can't tell if where that line is.
I'm erring on the side that he's just dumb because he's fought Alex Pereira like this. No one can be sensible and fight Alex Pereira, a guy who I think has a history of having a pretty decent left hook, and he's trying to defend left hooks with I can't get into it because I'll just get annoyed, but it is what it is. Like I said, tune in for the fight card because it's the last fight card of the year. We haven't got an awful lot else. KSW this weekend as well. Yes, Pudzianowski.
Pudzianowski's back.
Is back. Talking about big balls of muscle like Dricus to Plessis. Pudzianowski's back. So yeah, tune in for that. And then, like Tim said, we'll be back. There won't be an awful lot to review. We might do a short sort of 15-minute review, and then we'll end that podcast and we'll start a new podcast with our end of year picks. Yeah, and a bit of a year in review, end of year picks, and it's we've got plenty of stuff out on the site as well. I'm doing a fighters that retired in 2022 piece. Tim's got plenty of content coming out as sort of we're doing a lot of year in review pieces. I'm going to be revisiting my predictions from the beginning of the year and seeing just quite how far off I was. So
we're going to look back because last year we predicted will this person be champion at the end of next year. We're going to look back at that,
and we might have to look back behind the sofa kind of because it's a slow burner for me in 2022, as Tim was alluding to. So I'm really excited for that show next week. It might not be on the Monday, it might be on the Tuesday, it might be on the Wednesday. We'll see, but there'll definitely be one or two podcasts out next week.
70 minutes in the bag, and we mentioned we covered everything. We even mentioned we covered all of our usual suspects. Let's get out of here for the week. Frazer, we'll talk to you next week.
Nice one, thank you, man.